This is the time of year when I'm out and about a lot doing lots of teaching because it's autumn and so it's bulb planting time. And I can hand over lots of information about our trials of different varieties, but also about methods like how to keep grey squirrels off your bulbs, etc., etc. So there's lots coming up. Courses at Perch Hill from October the 21st to the 24th, covering all my classic courses. I'm also at Gate Street even the week before that. That's the most beautiful venue in the Surrey Hills from the 14th of October till the 16th of October. So check that out with lots of different subjects. I'm then at Oxley's Barn in Gloucestershire from the 11th to the 14th of November, so a bit nearer Christmas, and we're going to be doing quite a bit on Christmas there. And finally, I've got a week of courses at Perch Hill again, really concentrating on Christmas from the 18th to the 20th of November. So I hope you'll find something that might interest you amongst some of those. See you then. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven. I want to talk today about one of the commonest questions that I'm asked about gardening. I reckon the three commonest questions I'm asked. Number one, how do you deal with slugs and snails? Well, we did that in another episode, so I won't go back over that again, but I feel for everybody. And it's not been so bad this year, has it? Not nearly as bad, but then we've had aphids. But anyway. And number two, without doubt, is how do you stop grey squirrels eating your bulbs as you go into autumn? And I'm going to stop there because that's what I'm going to talk about. And it is just, particularly in an urban environment, oddly. I mean, you would think you have more grey squirrels in the country, and we certainly have plenty, I can tell you. But it just seems to be particularly a problem with people with bulbs in containers in a city or in a town. But I've probably got lots of village and country dwellers shouting out as they're listening, no, I have it too. And then in the country also you may have chickens or hens as we do. And I'm afraid what may go hand in hand with that is the longtails, i.e. rats. And certainly we have had a big problem with rats, not recently, but in previous years, and they have been eating our bulbs as well. So how on earth can we stop the rodents eating our bulbs? Well, I promise you, you really can. Josie and I Josie Lewis, the head gardener, and I are pretty obsessed with this subject. And it is interesting. It's easy to forget from one year to the next. So I was actually doing a photo shoot with Jonathan Buckley, the photographer who I've worked with for 3 decades. I've gone on about him a lot in previous episodes, so I won't talk about that. I keep saying that, don't I? I keep saying I'm not going to talk about that because I've already talked about it. But anyway, so we were here doing a shoot in the middle of October, and I was planting up these rattan baskets, which were these new containers that were more portable for going on our terrace, and it meant we could put them on wheels and we could wheel them about outside the new greenhouse. So I was planting them up with a bulb collection in a bulb lasagna, and I did them all. And the next morning I came down and walked into the greenhouse, and just as I walked through the door, I suddenly noticed the baskets on the right and left had been completely and utterly turfed out, not tipped over, but turfed out. And every bulb that I had photographed with Jonathan and planted the afternoon before had gone. Every single one. And I just couldn't believe it. The cheeky so-and-sos, they hadn't even given me 1 day to put any protection on. They got in there and eaten them already. So it reminded me not to be complacent. And as soon as you plant your bulbs, you need to put some preventative measures in place to stop the rodents eating the lot. And they can't eat them all in one go, so they must have gone away and stashed them all. So I'll probably find tulips and iris and crocus popping up in some random place in the garden where I didn't put them because some grey squirrel has buried them. Anyway, back to what you can do about it. Lots of people will tell you different techniques, and certainly I've been advised in the past to put chicken wire over the top of my pots. But here, when we wrote the pot book, Josie and I, we counted the number of pots, and we've got a lot more now. But even then, we had almost a pot for every single day of the year. So I think we had something like 367 or something like that. Anyway, we've got more now because we're always buying more and adding more. And the wicker ones certainly weren't there when we did that count. So there are definitely more. And so the idea of putting chicken wire over every single one of our pots would just be too much. So I can't be doing with that. And anyway, we found that on our big pots that we did do that with, the squirrels seemed to knock it off perfectly adeptly, and we would often find the chicken wire sitting on the ground below the pot. So it didn't work for us here. So number one, no. Number two, do you know what? It worked for us for several years, which was we put chili flakes in the final layer of the compost. Not sure Chris Packham would be very keen on me with the chili flakes with the grey squirrels. I think that might be a bit unkind. So not sure about that. So then we tried rolling the bulbs in chili powder, which someone else told me. So we got a big tub trug of chili powder. We bought 2 or 3 drums from our catering supermarket place, wholesale place, and we dampened the bulbs and rolled them in this chili powder and put them into the bulb lasagnas. And again, that worked for a couple of years, but then it stopped working. So whether our resident grey squirrel population got a taste for a bit of spice, I have no idea, but I can tell you it stopped working. So we had to then think of a new system. So then we moved on to an incredibly functional, typical Josie, do the obvious first, which was certainly as a medical student, we were always taught, why do you have a high temperature? Well, you maybe have got a cold, or perhaps you got flu, but it's quite unlikely you got meningitis. Do you know what I mean? We were taught very much to go from the commonest cause down to the least common cause and not jump to dramatic conclusions that somebody was gravely ill. Anyway, don't know how I got onto that tangent, but Josie's always very practical. And so she just said, why don't we just use our Eryngiums, which are sea hollies, Latin name for Eryngium. They're very spiky, over the top of our pots. So rather than chicken wire, let's lay spiky things. So then we did Eryngiums, we did holly. And actually what we've ended up doing now is we now prune our roses a little bit earlier than we used to. So we're doing our bulb lasagnas perhaps in October, and I'll come on to why we might even bring them a little bit forward. October, perhaps November. But for those that we want to do a little bit later, we prune our roses and then we lay a noughts and crosses grid of rose prunings with the thorns very much intact over the top as a final layer over the pot. And actually, they don't look bad, unlike chicken wire. They don't look bad, covered in snow, covered in frost. They look perfectly elegant. And then when your bulbs start coming up in February and March, the foliage, you can normally quite safely remove them at that point, because I think it's the fresh smell of the bulb that draws the grey squirrels in. So we find as long as they've started growing, it seems that they don't then get dug up by the grey squirrels. I don't know if you found that, but we found that pretty fail-safe here. Anyway, so it's rose prunings all the way for us for our later planting pots. So that's normally for our tulips. For the earlier ones, we haven't yet pruned our roses. So, for instance, if we've got narcissus in pots or in the border, it could be, and we try and get narcissus, alliums, anemones, hyacinths in September or October, well, we won't have pruned our roses by that point. Our roses will still be flowering. So what other system can we use? So last winter, we did a really big trial. We started it the previous autumn winter, but last year we did it even wider. And we have found that this brilliant thing of pot toppers is as successful as the rose prunings. And what I mean by a pot topper is what it says on the tin, which is it's the final layer of planting that goes in over your bulb lasagna. So you might have tulip layer 1 near the base of the pot, tulip layer 2, 4-5 inches above, tulip layer 3, 4-5 inches above, iris reticulata or whatever, layer 4, and then, or even don't have the iris in this pot, then the pot topper goes in as that final top layer. And weirdly, and I don't know why, but maybe it disguises the smell, but I promise you, over 60 or 70 pots with pot toppers that we had in the garden this year, we did not lose one single one to grey squirrels after my wicker pot debacle. And so what pot toppers are we using? I'm going to divide this now into edibles and ornamentals. So I'll start with ornamentals. And this spring has been particularly beautiful, as you will all remember. We had incredibly lovely March and even hotter April, and actually a rather dry beginning to May, which then stopped as soon as Chelsea stopped, didn't it? But anyway, it was a great year for violas or pansies. And I've got various ones that I particularly fell in love with. Peach Shades Mix, we sowed in the end of August, first week of September, and then put them as plugs over our earlier bulb plantings. And that did incredibly well. And we went on picking those right the way through till June. And then the beautiful one, which is called Burgundy Ruffles Mix and Frizzle Sizzle Burgundy. And then there's a blue Frizzle Sizzle or Ruffles as well, which I absolutely love. And all these have done so well and protected our bulbs from the get-go. They flowered a little bit in the autumn, went on strike a bit as it got very cold, but then flowered their socks off March, April and May, once we'd taken the tulips down to just their foliage. So we deadheaded them, but the pansies and violas just kept going. And they really 100% protected those bulbs underneath. So I vouch massively for sowing or getting seedlings of the violas and the pansies, for putting over your early pots. And also, we had real success with Ami visnaga, which is the more sort of ferny foliage Ami. So a little bit, the foliage is more elegant, the flowers are less elegant than Ami majus, but that did incredibly well as a pot topper. And we had that overplanting a lovely narcissus called Tressemble, which was on trial. And that looked so good. You know, way before the narcissus flowered, we had the Ami looking good and it protected the bulbs underneath. And of course, there are all the heucheras, so the evergreen heucheras. And I've got various ones that, of course, because they're perennial, they're still going and they'll go back over their pots again. But there's one that I had with the paintbrush viola, the one that's sort of stippled and, it's such a lovely variety of viola. And with that, I had heuchera black taffeta, which is almost sort of ebony crimson with a lovely ruffled edge, very like taffeta. And then I also really like the big sort of wine, but washed over with silver variety sugar plum. So those were two of my favourites that we had. So those are perennial, and they get put out in the border in the summer and then back over their pots for the autumn and through the winter until, again, they look so good all the way through because they're evergreen. Before I finish, there's more, because if you are really short of space and you want to use every inch of space for growing edibles, then we've also had huge success with that as the pot topper layer. And so whether it's got to be hardy, of course. So the dwarf kales are fantastic. I had a big pot on my doorstep of hyacinth Anastasia with the kale, the dwarf curly scarlet variety of kale. So I didn't even have to put my slippers on to pick my kale for supper for that wonderful wilted kale recipe, which I've gone on quite a lot about, which you'll find on the website in a delicious tahini dressing, which is incredibly healthy and incredibly delicious. So that was a real triumph. And hyacinths really do need to be ideally planted in September or October. But it would be too late to plant these pot toppers if you leave it till November or December. That's the key thing, that they won't settle in to then produce an either flower or produce leaf well if you don't plant them really by the middle of October as plugs, and so sowing them or getting seedlings 4 to 6 weeks before that. So the kales are good, the chards are good because they're really hardy, the salad leaves are good, mitsuna, red frills mustard, salad rocket, mibuna, any of those are incredibly hardy. Come rain, come snow even, come frost, they will be totally happy and you'll harvest from them, cut and come again. twice a week, and way before your bulb leaves come, you'll have had 20 or 30 meals from them if you want. So they're really good as pot toppers. And finally, and perhaps my favourite of all, are the hardy herbs. And so I had a pot lasagna planted up with bulbs all the way through, but with giant of Napoli parsley over the top. I had a pot with the lovely sage called bagaton over the top. I had another with chervil over the top, 5 or 6 plugs in a big 50 centimetre diameter pot. But all of these, and even coriander in a sheltered spot, will give you harvest all the way through the winter. And it will protect your bulbs underneath. So, grey squirrels or not, you might want to do that. But honestly, those are tried and tested by us systems of protecting your bulbs against marauding rodents. So I passionately recommend them. Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cookie to Range with me, Sarah Raven, talking about pot toppers and grey squirrel protection. Next week, I'm going to talk about bulb lasagnas out in the garden, but also in the greenhouse, and how to give you a succession of colour from very, very early in the year inside, if you've got a cold frame greenhouse or polytunnel, moving to outside. So literally giving you January to January flowers and food for picking. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.